the three joint resolutions of disapproval, or JRDs, that the Senate will be voting on tomorrow. They are SJ Res 111 to block 120 millimeter tank rounds, SJ Res 113 to block 120 millimeter high explosive mortar rounds, SJ Res 115 to block JDAMs, which are guidance kits attached to many of the bombs dropped in Gaza. The truth of the matter is that from a legal perspective, these resolutions are not complicated. They're cut and dry. The United States government is currently in violation of the law, and every member of the U.S. Senate who believes in the rule of law should vote for these resolutions. The Foreign Assistance Act and the Arms Export Control Act are very clear. The United States cannot provide weaponry to countries that violate internationally recognized human rights or block U.S. humanitarian aid. According to the United Nations, much of the international community and every humanitarian organization on the ground in Gaza, Israel is clearly in violation of these laws. Under these circumstances, it is illegal for the U.S. government to provide them with more offensive weaponry. Joint resolutions of disapproval are Congress's tool to enforce those laws. As I have said many times, Israel clearly had a right to respond to the horrific Hamas terrorist attacks on October 7th, which killed some 1,200 innocent people and took 250 hostages. I don't think anybody in the U.S. Senate disagrees with that. But Prime Minister Netanyahu's extremist government has not simply waged war against Hamas. It has waged all-out war against the Palestinian people. Within Gaza's population of just 2.2 million inhabitants, more than 43,000 have been killed and more than 103,000 injured, 60% of whom are women, children, and elderly people. 2/3 of all structures in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed. That includes 87% of the housing. 87% of the housing, 84% of health facilities, and 70% of water and sanitation plants. Every one of Gaza's 12 universities has been bombed, as have hundreds of schools. For 13 months, there has been no electricity in Gaza. And that's what has gone on over the last year. And as horrific as that situation is, what is taking place today, now, as we speak, is even worse. As a result of Israel blocking desperately needed humanitarian aid in recent weeks, the volume of aid getting into Gaza is lower than at any point since the war began. More aid is needed, less aid is getting through. The result, and let's be very clear about this, the result is that many, many thousands of children are facing malnutrition and starvation. According to very recent UN reports, quote, the situation unfolding in North Gaza is apocalyptic. The entire population in North Gaza is at imminent risk of dying from disease, famine, and violence, end of quote. And Israel's recent decision to ban UNRWA, the backbone of the humanitarian response in Gaza, will only make a horrific situation even worse. Clearly, what is happening in Gaza today is unspeakable. But what makes it even more painful is that much of what is happening there has been done with U.S. weapons and with American taxpayer support. In the last year alone, the U.S. has provided $18 billion in military aid to Israel and delivered more than 50,000 tons of military equipment. In other words, and this is the most important point to be made, the United States of America is complicit in these atrocities. That complicity must end, and that is what these resolutions are about. It is time to tell the Netanyahu government that they cannot use U.S. taxpayer dollars and American weapons in violation of U.S. and international law and in violation of our moral values. It is also time to make clear to Netanyahu that he cannot continue to undermine U.S. foreign policy goals. The U.S. government wants a ceasefire for hostage deal. Netanyahu has prevented a deal to preserve his coalition. The U.S. government wants more humanitarian aid to reach desperate people in Gaza. Netanyahu is blocking it. The U.S. government wants to contain regional escalation. Netanyahu has refused diplomatic off-ramps and launched several reckless attacks without consulting the United States. The U.S. government wants to stop settlement expansion and settler violence in the West Bank. Netanyahu and his ministers have driven record settlement expansion and armed extremist settlers. The U.S. government wants a plan for post-war governance in Gaza. Netanyahu will not engage. And by the way, blocking these sales would also be in keeping with actions taken by some of our closest allies. The UK suspended 30 arms export licenses after concluding there was an unspeakable risk that they could be used in violation of international law. Germany, Italy, Spain, Canada, Belgium, and the Netherlands have taken similar steps. UN bodies have called for an end to the arms shipment fueling the conflict. So let me thank all of you again for being here. Let me hand the mic over to Senator Merkley. Jeff?